The ballroom was buzzing with laughter, music, and clinking champagne glasses, a perfect distraction for the deal of the year. No one paid attention to the janitor sweeping in the corner, and absolutely no one noticed his daughter, a quiet little girl sitting on a bench with her sketchbook. But she noticed everything. She saw two men in suits whispering, glancing over their shoulders, hands trembling as they exchanged a thick black folder for an identical one. She didn't understand business. She didn't understand contracts. But she understood fear, because the moment they swapped the folders, both men looked around like they had just committed a crime. Later that night, she tugged on a man's sleeve, a man no one else dared to touch. The Mafia Boss. Her voice trembled. I saw them switch the folder you were waiting for." The room went silent. His cigar froze mid-air. Even his own men looked at her like she'd spoken a curse. "What did you just say?" he asked softly. Too softly. She pointed to the balcony where the men had disappeared, her small hand shaking but steady enough to reveal the truth, and the boss's face changed, not with anger, but with a cold realization. The entire deal he built his empire on had just been stolen, by men who thought no one had seen it, by men who had underestimated a janitor's daughter. What happened next would shake the room and rewrite the fate of everyone involved. Stay with me until the end, because what the Mafia Boss uncovers next will expose a betrayal deeper than anyone imagined. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get started. This is the story of how an 8-year-old girl named Sophia changed the course of an underground empire with just 7 words. And what makes this story extraordinary isn't just the betrayal she exposed. It's how her innocence shattered the careful walls that powerful men had built around their darkest secrets. Sofia Rodriguez never belonged in that ballroom. The Grand Imperial Hotel was hosting the annual charity gala, where Chicago's elite gathered to write checks and feel good about themselves. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors. Women in designer gowns glided between tables laden with champagne and caviar. Men in $1,000 suits discussed deals that would reshape the city's skyline. But Sophia's father, Miguel, worked the night shift as head janitor. He'd been cleaning these halls for 12 years, invisible to the people who mattered. Tonight was different, though. His regular babysitter had canceled last minute, and Miguel had no choice but to bring Sophia with him. She promised to stay quiet, to sit in the corner with her drawing pad and colored pencils. The child had learned early how to disappear. In her 8 years of life, she'd mastered the art of becoming background noise. Adults talked freely around her because to them, she simply didn't exist. She was furniture with pigtails, a shadow with sneakers that barely touched the floor when she sat on the velvet bench near the service entrance. While her father emptied trash bins and polished surfaces, Sophia sketched the beautiful people. She drew the ladies' sparkling earrings, the men's confident smiles, the way they held their wine glasses like they owned the world. Her notebook filled with careful observations of a world she could see but never touch. That's when Vincent Marconi arrived. Even Sophia could sense his importance. The crowd parted as he walked through, conversations dropping to whispers. He wasn't the tallest man in the room, but something about his presence made everyone else seem smaller. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his silver hair slicked back, and his cold gray eyes missed nothing. This was a man who commanded respect through fear, who built his fortune in shadows while maintaining the facade of a legitimate businessman. Vincent owned construction companies, shipping warehouses, and restaurant chains across the city. But everyone knew his real business happened in back rooms and parking lots, sealed with handshakes that could end lives. Tonight, he was here for one reason: to finalize the Riverside development deal, a massive construction project that would net his organization $50 million and give them control over 6 city blocks. The folder containing those contracts was his golden ticket. Months of negotiation, bribery, and careful planning had led to this moment. All he needed was to review the final terms and sign on the dotted line. The deal was supposed to be bulletproof, handled by his most trusted associates. Sophia watched him move through the crowd, noting how people stepped aside without being asked. She drew his serious face, the way his bodyguards flanked him like silent sentinels. Her pencil captured the tension in his jaw, the calculating look in his eyes as he surveyed the room. Near the grand staircase, Vincent stopped to speak with Marcus Chen, his lawyer, and Tony Benedetto, his financial advisor. These were the two men he'd entrusted with the most important deal of his career. Both had been with his organization for over 5 years, proving their loyalty through smaller operations. Tonight, they carried his future in a thick black folder marked with a small red seal. What Vincent didn't know was that Marcus and Tony had been planning this betrayal for months. They'd grown tired of being Vincent's subordinates, tired of watching him claim credit for their work while they received scraps from his table. The Riverside deal was their opportunity to break free, to steal Vincent's empire and claim it as their own. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They'd prepared an identical folder containing falsified contracts. Instead of the real terms that would benefit Vincent's organization, these documents would transfer all assets and control to a shell company they'd secretly established. By the time Vincent discovered the switch, they'd have disappeared with his money and his power. Sophia continued drawing, unaware that she was about to witness a crime that would reshape the Chicago underworld. Her innocent eyes tracked Marcus and Tony as they approached the balcony overlooking the hotel's garden. She watched them glance nervously around the ballroom, their faces tight with anxiety. The little girl tilted her head, curious about their strange behavior. In her 8 years, she'd learned to read adult emotions like a survival skill. Her father had taught her to recognize when people were angry, sad, or scared, because understanding grown-ups kept her safe. These two men radiated fear so powerfully that even a child could sense it. Marcus pulled the black folder from his briefcase, his hands shaking slightly. Tony produced an identical folder from his jacket. Sophia's artistic eye immediately noticed the subtle differences. The real folder had a small red wax seal, while the fake one bore only a red sticker designed to look like wax from a distance. She watched, fascinated, as they made the switch. Marcus carefully peeled away the authentic seal and placed it on the false documents. Tony disposed of the original contracts in a champagne bucket filled with ice, where the papers would dissolve beyond recognition. The entire exchange took less than 30 seconds, but 30 seconds was enough for Sophia to understand that something terrible had just happened. She didn't comprehend the business implications, but she recognized deception when she saw it. These men were lying, stealing, betraying someone's trust. Her father had always taught her that lying was wrong, that taking things that didn't belong to you was a sin that would follow you forever. The two men separated, melting back into the crowd, with forced smiles and casual conversation. They rejoined Vincent near the bar, presenting him with the switched folder as if nothing had happened. Marcus even made a joke about the evening's entertainment, his nervous laughter barely concealing his guilt. Vincent accepted the folder without suspicion. These were his men, his trusted advisors. The thought of betrayal never crossed his mind. He tucked the documents into his coat pocket, planning to review them in his private office after the gala concluded. Sophia sat frozen on her bench, her colored pencils forgotten in her lap. She'd witnessed something that made her stomach hurt with worry. The scared feeling in her chest told her that someone needed to know what she'd seen. But who would believe an 8-year-old girl? Who would even listen to the janitor's daughter? As the evening progressed, Sophia couldn't shake the image of those two men switching folders. She tried to return to her drawings, but her hands trembled too much to hold the pencils steady. Every time she looked at Vincent, she felt a growing sense of urgency. He seemed so confident, so unaware of what had been done to him. The ballroom began to empty as midnight approached. Wealthy guests said their goodbyes and headed home to their mansions and penthouses. Vincent remained, conducting final business with various associates, completely oblivious to the trap that had been set for him. Sophia knew this was her only chance. Once Vincent left the hotel, the truth would leave with him, buried under layers of deception and false documents. Her father had always taught her to speak up when something was wrong, even when she was scared, especially when she was scared. Taking a deep breath that seemed to fill her entire small body, Sophia stood up from her bench. Her legs felt wobbly as she walked across the marble floor toward the most dangerous man in Chicago. Each step brought her closer to a moment that would change everything. Vincent Marconi's bodyguards stepped forward instinctively, their hands moving toward concealed weapons. But Vincent raised one finger, a simple gesture that froze every man in the room. His gray eyes never left Sophia's face as he processed what this child had just told him. The little girl stood there in her simple pink dress, her drawing pad clutched against her chest, like a shield. Around them, the remaining guests continued their conversations, completely unaware that an 8-year-old had just lit the fuse on a powder keg that would explode Vincent's world. "Come here, little one," Vincent said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made grown men tremble. But somehow, his tone remained gentle when he spoke to Sophia. She took 3 small steps forward, her sneakers silent on the marble floor. Vincent crouched down to her eye level, a movement that shocked his bodyguards. This was a man who never lowered himself for anyone, who commanded respect through intimidation and fear. Yet here he was, kneeling before a janitor's daughter, like she held the keys to his kingdom. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he whispered. His words meant only for her ears. Sophia's voice came out in a rush, the words tumbling over each other as she described the 2 men on the balcony, the way they switched folders, how scared they looked afterward. Vincent's jaw tightened with each detail. Marcus and Tony, his most trusted advisors, men he'd brought into his inner circle, men he'd protected and enriched. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife ever could. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the black folder they'd given him. For the first time tonight, he examined it closely. The red seal looked perfect from a distance, but up close he could see the subtle differences Sophia's artistic eye had noticed. The wax was too smooth, too uniform. It was fake. "Where is your father?" Vincent asked Sophia, his mind already calculating his next moves. The child pointed across the ballroom to where Miguel was cleaning champagne glasses near the service station. Vincent stood slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. But first, he had to secure the truth. With a subtle nod, he signaled his lieutenant, a mountain of a man named Salvatore. Within seconds, Marcus and Tony found themselves surrounded by Vincent's men, their escape routes quietly cut off. The 2 traitors hadn't noticed anything wrong yet. They stood near the bar, sharing nervous laughter and congratulating themselves on their successful deception. In their minds, they'd already won. Vincent would discover the switch too late, and by then, they'd have vanished with his empire. They had no idea that their entire plan had been unraveled by a child with colored pencils. Vincent walked across the ballroom with measured steps, Sophia's small hand tucked safely in his large one. The contrast was striking. The most feared man in Chicago, guided by the most innocent person in the room. His bodyguards formed a protective circle around them, ensuring no one could interfere with what was about to unfold. When they reached Miguel, the janitor looked up from his work with confusion and growing alarm. His daughter was holding hands with Vincent Marconi, a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. Miguel's face went pale as he processed what he was seeing. "Your daughter has done something very brave tonight," Vincent told him, his voice carrying genuine respect. "She's shown more loyalty in 5 minutes than some men show in 5 years. Miguel's hands shook as he set down his cleaning cloth, unsure whether to thank Vincent or run for their lives. Sophia looked up at Vincent with curious eyes. She still didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could feel the electricity in the air, the way conversations had stopped around them. the way people were starting to stare. "Are you going to hurt those men?" she asked with the directness only children possess. Vincent's expression softened slightly as he looked down at her. "Sometimes, little one, people need to face consequences for their choices," he replied carefully. "But you don't need to worry about that. You've done nothing wrong. In fact, you've done everything right." Across the ballroom, Marcus and Tony finally noticed the attention focused on Vincent and the little girl. A chill ran down Marcus's spine as he recognized Sophia, the janitor's daughter, the child who'd been sitting quietly in the corner all evening, the witness they'd completely overlooked. Tony's face drained of color as the realization hit him like a freight train. They'd been so careful about surveillance cameras, so meticulous about avoiding security guards, so paranoid about Vincent's bodyguards. But they'd never considered that an 8-year-old with an artist's eye would notice their deception. The two men tried to casually move toward the exit, but Vincent's men had already positioned themselves at every door. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Their carefully planned escape route had become a trap. Vincent handed Sophia back to her father, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands that had ordered unspeakable violence. "Take her to my office upstairs," he instructed Miguel. "She'll be safe there while I handle some business." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Miguel nodded frantically, scooping Sophia into his arms. As they headed toward the elevator, Sophia looked back over her father's shoulder. She watched Vincent approach Marcus and Tony, saw the way the two men's confident expressions crumbled into terror. "Daddy, what's going to happen to them?" she whispered as the elevator doors closed. Miguel held her tighter, unsure how to explain the world she'd just stepped into. A world where truth was currency and betrayal carried the highest price imaginable. In Vincent's penthouse office, Sophia sat in a leather chair that dwarfed her small frame. The room was filled with expensive art and antiques, but her attention was drawn to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Chicago sprawled before them like a glittering carpet of lights and possibilities. Miguel paced nervously, checking his watch every few seconds. He'd worked for Vincent's organization indirectly for years, maintaining the buildings where business was conducted, but he'd never been this close to the man himself. He'd certainly never imagined his daughter would become involved in Vincent's affairs. 20 minutes later, Vincent returned to his office. His suit was still immaculate, his hair still perfectly styled, but something had changed in his eyes. They held a satisfaction that comes from problems being permanently resolved. "It's finished," he announced simply. Marcus and Tony would never threaten anyone again. Their betrayal had been their final mistake, and Vincent had ensured they understood that before the end came. But now he faced a different challenge. Sophia had saved his empire, exposed a betrayal that would have destroyed everything he'd built. She deserved protection, reward, recognition. Yet she was also a witness to his world, a child who'd glimpsed behind the curtain of his carefully constructed facade. Vincent studied Sophia as she sat in his chair, her legs swinging freely, her drawing pad open to a sketch of the ballroom scene. Even now, she was capturing the evening's events in simple lines and colors, creating a permanent record of the night that changed everything. "Sophia," he said, settling into the chair across from her, "do you understand what happened tonight?" She looked up from her drawing, her dark eyes serious beyond her years. "Bad men tried to steal from you, but I told you the truth so you could stop them," she replied, with the clarity that only children possess. Vincent nodded slowly, impressed by her simple but accurate assessment. The question now was what to do with this brave little girl and her father. They'd become part of his story, witnesses to his justice, holders of secrets that could never be shared with the outside world. But they'd also proven their worth in ways that money couldn't measure. Vincent Marconi had built his empire on loyalty, fear, and calculated violence. Tonight, an 8-year-old girl had reminded him that sometimes the most powerful weapon was simply telling the truth. And that lesson would reshape how he viewed the world around him. Vincent leaned back in his chair, processing the weight of what had just transpired. This child had single-handedly prevented the collapse of his entire operation. But more than that, she'd shown him something he'd forgotten existed in his world. Pure, uncomplicated honesty. "Miguel," Vincent said, turning his attention to Sophia's father, who still stood nervously by the door. "How long have you worked in my buildings?" 12 years, sir," Miguel replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've always kept my head down. Done my job, never asked questions." Vincent nodded approvingly. "And your daughter? She draws what she sees?" "Everything, sir. She notices details that most adults miss. Always has since she was very small." Sophia looked up from her sketchpad, where she'd been quietly drawing Vincent's office. "I like to remember pretty things," she said simply, "and scary things too, so I can understand them better." Vincent felt something shift inside his chest. When was the last time someone had spoken to him without calculation, without hidden agendas? This child saw his world clearly, but without judgment. She'd witnessed his justice tonight and accepted it as simply another part of life to understand and remember. "Sophia, your father works very hard to take care of you," Vincent said, choosing his words carefully. "But I think you both deserve better than cleaning up after people who don't even see you." Miguel's eyes widened. "Sir, we're grateful for any work. We don't need—" Vincent raised his hand, silencing him. "Miguel, your daughter just saved me $50 million and potentially my life. Marcus and Tony weren't just stealing money. They were planning to eliminate me once they had control of my operations. Your little girl exposed a conspiracy that went far deeper than simple theft." The room fell silent except for the soft scratching of Sophia's pencil as she continued drawing. She'd captured Vincent's bodyguards standing by the door, their serious expressions and careful posture. Even in her simple style, the drawing conveyed the tension and power that surrounded Vincent Marconi. "I have a proposition," Vincent continued. "Miguel, I'm offering you a position managing security for all my legitimate businesses. Real security, not the kind that requires you to look the other way. Your job would be to notice things others miss, just like your daughter did tonight." Miguel's hands trembled. "Sir, I don't know anything about security, but you know about watching, about staying invisible while seeing everything. Those are exactly the skills I need. Someone who can move through my world without drawing attention. Someone whose loyalty can't be bought because they understand what integrity means." Vincent stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a thick envelope. "This is $50,000. Consider it a signing bonus and compensation for what Sophia did tonight. There's also something else." He opened a different drawer and retrieved a small, elegant box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a pendant shaped like an artist's palette. For Sophia, because artists see the world differently than everyone else. And sometimes that different perspective is exactly what the world needs. Sophia gasped when she saw the necklace, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "but I can't take something so expensive." "You already gave me something far more valuable," Vincent replied, fastening the necklace around her small neck. "You gave me the truth when it mattered most. That's worth more than all the gold in the world." Miguel stared at the envelope in his hands, unable to process the sudden change in their circumstances. "Sir, I don't understand. Why are you being so generous? We're nobody special." Vincent's expression grew serious. "Miguel, in my business, I'm surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear. Politicians, lawyers, businessmen, they all have angles, all want something from me. Your daughter told me the truth because it was the right thing to do. She didn't want money or favors or protection. She just wanted to help." He returned to his chair, studying Sophia as she examined her new necklace in the light. "Do you know what happened to the men who tried to steal from me, Sophia?" She looked up at him with those clear, honest eyes. "They can't hurt anyone anymore," she said matter-of-factly, "because you stopped them." Vincent nodded, impressed by her understanding. "That's right. Sometimes, when people choose to hurt others, they have to face consequences. It's not pretty, but it's necessary to protect good people like you and your father. Sophia considered this for a moment, then returned to her drawing. My dad always says that when you do something wrong, you have to make it right. But if you can't make it right, then someone else has to make sure you can't do wrong again. The simplicity of her moral code struck Vincent like lightning. This 8-year-old girl understood justice better than most adults in his world. She grasped the necessity of consequences without being corrupted by the violence required to enforce them. Sophia, I want to ask you something important, Vincent said, leaning forward. What you saw tonight, the men switching folders, what happened after? Can you keep that as our secret? Not because you did anything wrong, but because some stories are too dangerous for other people to know. Sophia nodded solemnly. I understand secrets. Sometimes grown-ups need privacy to protect people they care about. Vincent felt a strange sensation in his chest. When had he last cared about protecting someone's innocence? When had he worried about shielding someone from the darker aspects of his world? Yet here he was, concerned about preserving this child's view of the world while simultaneously bringing her deeper into his orbit. Miguel, there's one more thing, Vincent said, turning back to Sophia's father. I'm going to arrange for Sophia to attend St. Catherine's Academy. It's a private school for gifted children. Her artistic talents deserve proper nurturing, and her intelligence needs to be challenged. Sir, we could never afford. It's already arranged. Full scholarship, plus supplies, uniforms, everything she needs. Consider it an investment in someone who's already proven she can see what others miss. Sophia looked up from her drawing, her face glowing with excitement. Really? I could go to a real art school, the best in the city, Vincent confirmed. But Sophia, I need you to promise me something. No matter how much you learn, no matter how sophisticated you become, never lose that honesty that saved me tonight. The world will try to teach you that truth is complicated, that sometimes lying is easier. Don't listen to those voices. I promise, Mr. Vincent, Sophia said, holding up her little finger. Pinky promise. Vincent stared at her outstretched finger, remembering when promises were that simple, when a person's word actually meant something. Slowly, he reached out and linked his pinky with hers, sealing a pact that would bind them together for years to come. Now, Vincent said, standing up and straightening his jacket. It's very late, and young artists need their sleep. Salvatore will drive you home. Tomorrow, Miguel, report to my office at 9 a.m. We'll discuss your new responsibilities. As they prepared to leave, Sophia carefully packed her drawing supplies and clutched her sketchbook to her chest. The necklace caught the light as she moved, a constant reminder of the night that changed everything. Mr. Vincent, she said as they reached the door, will I see you again? Vincent's expression softened. I have a feeling, little one, that our paths will cross many more times. Artists and powerful men often need each other, even when they don't realize it. Sophia smiled, that pure, uncomplicated joy that only children possess. I hope so. I'd like to draw you again sometime. Maybe when you're not so sad. Vincent froze. Sad. In my drawing, your eyes look sad, like you're carrying something heavy that you can't put down. My dad gets that look sometimes when he thinks I'm not watching. Out of the mouths of babes. This child had seen through his carefully constructed facade to the loneliness underneath. She'd recognized something he'd hidden from everyone else, including himself. Maybe you're right, Vincent said quietly. Maybe I have been carrying something heavy, but tonight, thanks to you, it feels a little lighter. As Sophia and Miguel disappeared into the elevator, Vincent remained in his office, staring out at the city lights. The night had started with betrayal and nearly ended with the destruction of everything he'd built. Instead, it concluded with something he hadn't experienced in decades: hope. For the first time in years, Vincent Marconi fell asleep without checking the locks on his doors or reviewing his security protocols. Because sometimes, when an 8-year-old girl promises to keep your secrets and tells you the truth, you remember what it feels like to trust someone completely. The next morning would bring new challenges, new threats, new opportunities for betrayal. But it would also bring Sophia's laughter echoing through his legitimate businesses, her artistic eye catching details his security cameras missed, and her father's quiet competence ensuring that Vincent's world remained safe for those who deserved protection. 3 months later, Sophia's world had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The cramped apartment she'd shared with her father was now a memory, replaced by a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood where children rode bicycles and mothers pushed strollers without fear. Miguel wore pressed shirts instead of janitor uniforms, carried himself with newfound confidence, and smiled more often than Sophia had ever seen. But the most remarkable change was in Sophia herself. At St. Catherine's Academy, her artistic talents flourished under proper guidance. Her teachers marveled at her ability to capture not just images, but emotions and hidden truths in her drawings. She developed techniques that allowed her to see patterns others missed, details that revealed secrets people thought they'd buried. Vincent had been right about one thing. Their paths crossed frequently. Every week, Sophia and her father visited Vincent's main office, ostensibly so Miguel could report on security matters. But Vincent found himself looking forward to these meetings for an entirely different reason. Sophia's presence reminded him of something he'd lost long ago, something he couldn't quite name but desperately needed. During these visits, Sophia would sit in the corner of Vincent's conference room, sketching while the adults discussed business. Her drawings had become more sophisticated, more detailed, capturing nuances that even security cameras missed. Vincent had learned to pay attention to what Sophia drew, because her artistic eye often revealed things his trained professionals overlooked. That's how she noticed Detective Raymond Walsh. Sophia was sketching near the window of Vincent's office when she saw a man across the street, pretending to read a newspaper while watching their building. Something about his posture, the way he held his head, the careful positioning of his body triggered her instincts. She'd learned to recognize surveillance from watching her father's new job, understanding how people behaved when they were trying to remain invisible while observing others. "Mr. Vincent," Sophia said quietly, not looking up from her drawing. "There's a man across the street who's been watching us for 3 days now." Vincent's conversation with Miguel stopped mid-sentence. "What man?" Sophia continued drawing, her pencil capturing details with practiced precision. "He changes clothes, but he stands the same way. Yesterday he wore a blue coat. Today it's brown. But see how his left shoulder dips slightly? He carries something heavy on that side. And he checks his watch every 12 minutes, like he's reporting to someone." Vincent moved to the window, studying the street below. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Pedestrians walked past. Cars moved through traffic. Nothing seemed out of place. Then he spotted the man Sophia had described. Without her artistic eye pointing him out, Vincent would have dismissed him as just another citizen going about his day. And that's how an 8-year-old girl with colored pencils became the most valuable asset in Vincent Marconi's empire. Sophia's honesty didn't just save $50 million that night. It reminded a dangerous man that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. Her courage changed everything, proving that speaking up, even when you're scared, even when you're just a child, can reshape entire worlds.